So I had been thinking a little bit about sport. That's what I do. It's what I do for a living. And I think a lot of what I see in sport has changed in the last 10 or 15 years. It's become a lot more scientific. And the specialisation which people are encouraged, even parents encouraging their children, seems to be starting at a much earlier age. And there's lots of discussion in different areas about what makes an elite athlete. How do you become a successful athlete? And by and large, it can be broken down to a number of things. So you need good genetics. So if you're 5'6", you're not going to become a basketball player. Obvious examples. But I think you really need the sorts of genetics that suit the sport you're going into. You need good parents. Parents who have money, time, enthusiasm to take you to all your lessons and so on and so forth. You need to have access to technology, to coaching, to a good club environment, to a competitive structure. You also really, and this is maybe part of the genetics, you really need a personality which is sports focused. And by that, I mean that in a bad way. Because to be a great athlete, you need to be absolutely obsessed. Everything in your life has to be about your sport. And it's not just the love of winning and getting a little bit of money or a medal, it's the hate of losing. Elite athletes hate losing, and they'll do anything, and they don't think of their rivals as people, they just think of them as barriers to their psychological determination to prove themselves. So normal people are not elite athletes. If you take those things all together, you think, well, actually, it's just luck then, isn't it? It's been in the right time, in the right place, get channeled into the right sport that happens to suit you by chance. Okay? So, there's some inefficiencies in this system. There's lots of people who go for the wrong sport, and it's only later in life they realise they weren't actually suited to golf. They would have been much better suited to cycling. But they never tried cycling at a young enough age, so they were already missed the boat. There's lots of people who tried really hard and gave up their education, and maybe they get injured, or they just realise they've not got that determination of personality that they need to become an elite athlete. So lots of people run out of money because it's very expensive. You've got to have your training camps at altitude. You've got to have your specialist equipment and nutritionist. You've got to have your drugs, legal or illegal, in order to get to the top. You've got to be prepared to make all those sacrifices. So that's at the individual and the family level, of course. But the government level, the national funding for elite sport is enormous. So for an athlete who has already made it onto UK Sport Olympic programme, so all the investment that's gone into them to get them there is not even in this equation. Once they're there, to get a medal is another £4 million per medal. Okay? So in Britain, we are putting about £400 million a year into elite sport. That doesn't even include football and all those big professional sports. That's just the Olympic sports that need government funding. So you imagine the amount of money that's going into all those other sports, all the parents, all the grandparents, all the taxi journeys, early morning training for swimming, all of that kind of stuff. So if we imagine a brave new world in which rationality and logic is applied, and we put ethics and humanity to the side for a minute, then where does that lead us? Now, one place it might lead us is the selective breeding of athletes. So, okay, I've put this to a good friend of mine who told me I was a complete idiot and I shouldn't mention this in public ever again. However, there's a certain logic to it. If we knew who was going to be the next generation of athletes in a particular sport, we could channel all of our money and all of our efforts and all our best coaches and so on and so forth into that group. We wouldn't waste it on these people who are not going to make it. Parents would be able to channel their children into the sport that they're suited for. So all those wasted hours of training to be netball players or handball players or football players, and they're never going to make it. Actually, if we had some advice as to where to go, first of all, I would save quite a lot of time and hassle and money. As a country, we would know what we're going to get. We would know in 20 years' time, these are the people we know who are going to represent us in the Olympics. We can have some confidence that we are producing the next generation. Now, are we far away from that? I'm not too sure we are. We can already do a genetic test to establish if someone should go towards a specific type of sport. So we can establish if they're going to be more in strength sports or speed sports. You can do that quite easily. You could do a genetic test to see what your inheritance is, your genetic inheritance. What sort of characteristics did your forefathers have? Foremothers, is that a word? Anyway. We also have technology which is gearing towards being able to assess somebody's characteristics in a broader sense, including their psychological characteristics. And those are probably equally as important as physical characteristics. So, then one of the issues is families. Is this the way that families should run? Should we have families geared towards sport, like in a planned sort of way? Well, again, in some ways we already do that. We all have ideas as parents what we want our children to be like. We all got them channeled into music lessons or learning a second language or going to private school. We've all got ideas of what our children or future children are going to be like. We've got ideas of what sort of person we would like to be the parent of our child. Certain characteristics that we know that we're happy with, that we would like to see reproduced consciously or unconsciously. And sport is probably heading more towards early specialisation, similar to what we saw in East Germany. Academies. So what the East Germans did was identify children aged 5, 6, 7, take them away into boarding schools, and we think that was terrible, that's totalitarianism and so on and so forth. But the last 10 years has seen the rise of sports academies to replace high schools. If you've got a particular talent, that's where you go. So, what is stopping anyone? I was going to say, why don't we? Why don't we? Why don't we move that one step backwards and say, how do we create a child who's going to be a great swimmer? Okay, we could leave it to chance and accident and let all these hundreds of thousands of people go and see if they can make it. Or, what we could do instead is take the two best swimmers in a particular event, the male and the female. Okay, let's just experiment with these ideas. So let's just say we had a national championship. We discover the two best 100-metre breaststroke swimmers, and we decide, okay, they could produce the next 100 metres breaststroke swimmer. Does that sound totally unethical? Well, we could pay them for it, of course, so they're not losing out. We could not force them to do it. We could just make it an option. So they win the event, they get a gold medal, they get a week in a 5-star hotel. See what happens. What would be the risk? The female swimmer might say, I don't want to ruin my career. If I take 2 years out to have a baby, I've given up. So, okay, just give them some money to pay them off to do that. Or it could be a surrogacy, or maybe they're not brought up by that family. Maybe there's a preschool nursery that's full of all these children that are pre-planned football players and swimmers, and they've all got their own special diet that they get at lunchtime, and all nice slogans around the walls about how a winner is everything, and so on and so forth. So we could see, I suppose, what we might term the breeding of athletes. Would it be that bad? Everybody I've mentioned this so far seems a little bit shocked at the idea. But it's a brave new world. That's the title of our day today. And the logic of the scientization of sport, what the very famous sports historian John Hoberman called the dehumanization of sport, is actually on that track. There's nothing really to stop this over-scientization, this over-rationalization. It's very, very rare to get a successful athlete just out of the blue. They've just developed a natural talent by themselves. That might have happened 20 years ago, It's very rare to get someone who doesn't do the amount of training that everybody else does. So those legendary football players like George Best and Matt Letizia, who didn't take their athleticism seriously, well, those days are over. If you're not in a football academy, by the time you're maybe 7 or 8 years old, and if it's not one of the best football academies in the country, you're probably not going to make it. So, I think sport is kind of on this road. And if we think of the ethics of sport as a whole, we're beginning to learn about drug taking, match fixing, child abuse, not just sexual but physical abuse, the sacrifices people make, the injuries, the psychological damage of the pressure at a young age, then I don't see anything actually in the world of sport that would prevent this from happening if society as a whole let it happen. Is there any precedence? Well, there's 1 or 2 rumours about 1 or 2 basketball players that were sort of planned in certain countries, but they're just rumours. We know, of course, that there's some famous athletes who are in the same sport. So Laura Trott and Jason Kenny, the cyclists, have just got married. What sort of child are they going to have? So obviously they've not been pre-planned. So what is the ethical problem? The ethical problem, I think, is that it smacks of totalitarianism and state intervention. But there will come a point, I think, where the amount of money that goes into sport and all of these issues come under the microscope so much that if we want to have an effective and efficient system that's kind of fair and open but still produces gold medals, then maybe sometime in the future we will have some form of breeding process. Thank you.